Hey there, space enthusiasts. Ready to blast off on another deep dive? Today we're setting our sights on Intuitive Machines.
Ticker symbol LUNR.
This company's making waves with a pretty audacious goal, building a full-fledged lunar economy.
Yeah, not just visiting the moon, but actually setting up shop there.
Pretty wild, right? So let's break it down. What makes Intuitive Machines so intriguing? What's their game plan?
Well, it's fascinating how they're structured. It's not just about launching rockets. They've got these 4 distinct business units, almost like a mini space conglomerate.
Okay, mini conglomerate. Let's unpack that. We've got lunar access services, which sounds pretty straightforward, getting stuff to the moon. But what makes their approach unique?
Efficiency and precision. They're all about short transit times, dedicated launch vehicles, pinpoint landings. Think express deliveries to the moon.
So less sightseeing, more like lunar FedEx.
Got it. Then there's orbital services, keeping things tidy and safe up there.
Exactly. Space debris removal, space domain awareness, even ride shares. Imagine hitching a ride to the moon with a satellite. Space carpooling. I love it. Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. Lunar data services. They're building their own private lunar internet. Seriously.
Yep, the Lunar Data Network, or LDN, real-time lunar research data communication between outposts, streaming video from the moon.
It's the infrastructure for a future where we're not just visiting the moon.
But living and working there.
Right.
My mind is officially blown.
Yeah.
Okay, last but not least, space products and infrastructure. This sounds like survival on the moon, beyond just planting a flag.
It is. They're developing tech needed for a sustained lunar presence. Advanced manufacturing software for lunar operations, figuring out how to deal with those long, frigid lunar nights. And it's not just theoretical. They've got contracts with NASA to design a lunar terrain vehicle, for example.
So they're not just dreaming, they're doing... Okay, so they've got this multifaceted business model, but who are the brains behind this lunar operation? Are we talking seasoned veterans or starry-eyed dreamers? Definitely veterans.
Yeah.
Their CEO, Stephen Altmus, over a decade of executive experience in aerospace. And their executive chairman, Ghaffarian, even more experience. This isn't some group of amateurs.
That's reassuring considering what they're trying to achieve. And they've already landed on the moon, which is a pretty solid testament to their capability. So how's that translating into financial success?
Their revenue growth has been pretty phenomenal, over 134% year over year.
That's impressive, but are they actually profitable?
Not yet. They're still in the heavy investment phase, pouring resources into research development expansion. It's typical for companies in this growth stage.
So they're spending big to grow big. What should we be watching for in their financials? Where are the potential red flags?
One thing to watch is free cash flow, which is currently negative. They're burning through cash to fuel those ambitious growth plans. Another point of interest is their debt-to-equity ratio.
Debt-to-equity ratios tend to make my eyes glaze over. Can you break that down for us, non-financial wizards?
Sure. It basically measures how much debt a company is using to finance its assets compared to how much is funded by shareholder equity. Think of it this way. If a company has a high debt-to-equity ratio, they've essentially borrowed a lot of money to grow their business.
And in Intuitive Machines' case,
their debt-to-equity ratio is actually negative, which might seem alarming, but it's largely due to the structure of their balance sheet. They have more liabilities than assets right now, but it's not necessarily a sign of financial distress. More of a technicality stemming from things like earn-out liabilities from their recent public offerings.
Okay, so not a major red flag, but definitely something to keep an eye on as we evaluate their overall financial health.
Exactly.
Okay.
We need to look at the bigger picture, not just one isolated metric.
So we've covered their business model, their leadership, got a glimpse of their financials. But where do we go from here? What other pieces of the puzzle do we need to analyze to really understand Intuitive Machines' potential?
Well, in part 2, we'll tackle market sentiment ownership structure and dive into a full SWOT analysis.
All SWOT analysis. It's like we're putting Intuitive Machines under the microscope.
Exactly. We're going to dissect their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into Intuitive Machines. Welcome back to our deep dive into Intuitive Machines.
All right, so we've laid the groundwork. Now let's talk about how the market's perceiving this ambitious company.
Yeah, because even with a solid business model and a great leadership team, investor sentiment can make or break a company, especially in a sector as, volatile as space tech.
For sure. So what's the general buzz around Intuitive Machines? Are investors feeling lunar-citic, about their prospects?
Haha. Well, there's definitely a buzz, but it's a mix of excitement and caution. Their historic moon landing was a major PR win. It really captured people's imaginations, investors, and the public alike. It demonstrated their capabilities and solidified their position as a serious player.
Right. It's one thing to promise the moon. It's another to actually deliver.
Exactly. And they haven't been resting on their laurels. They've secured partnerships with some big names like Nokia, collaborating on that lunar data network we discussed earlier.
Right, the private lunar internet. So what are the naysayers saying? What's tempering the enthusiasm?
Well, space travel is inherently risky, right? And there have been some concerns about potential launch delays for their upcoming missions. Any setbacks could impact their stock price and shake investor confidence.
Yeah, space is hard. Timelines are often fluid.
Exactly. Another concern is their reliance on government contracts, particularly with NASA.
Makes sense. What happens if government funding for space exploration shrinks or priorities shift?
Exactly. It makes them vulnerable to those political winds.
That's a valid point.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget the competition. They're not just up against scrappy startups. They're going head-to-head with giants like SpaceX and Boeing.
Right. Companies with deep pockets and tons of experience.
Well, it's like a David and Goliath situation, but with lunar rovers and rockets.
Yeah, exactly. So how do these conflicting forces play out in the market? What are analysts saying?
Right, are they bullish or bearish on intuitive machines?
It's kind of all over the map, to be honest. Price targets are ranging from $15 to $26 a share.
Okay, so there's quite a bit of uncertainty, it sounds like.
Yeah, some analysts are really bullish. They see huge growth potential in the space tech market. Others are more hesitant. They're waiting for more concrete signs of sustained profitability.
Makes sense. So some see them as a moonshot, others are taking a wait-and-see approach.
Exactly. And if we look at recent stock activity, it's been pretty volatile. Some big price swings, unusual options activity indicating speculation.
So big bets are being placed, but who are these players? Who actually owns intuitive machines?
The ownership structure is pretty interesting. A whopping 72.21% of their shares are held by institutional investors. Mutual funds, hedge funds, pension funds, the big guys.
Wow, that's significant. What does that level of institutional ownership tell us?
It generally indicates that these investors who are known for their long-term perspective and in-depth analysis see them as a viable investment with potential. They're betting on the company's future.
So they believe in the lunar dream. But what about the people actually running the show? The founders and management team? Do they have skin in the game?
Absolutely. Insider ownership is also really...
So their fortunes are directly tied to the company's success. That's a strong sign of alignment.
It is. It suggests they're in it for the long haul. They're committed to building a sustainable and successful business. Now, to really understand their potential, we need to look at their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's time for the SWOT analysis.
Okay, let's get strategic. Hit me with their strengths.
Well, their first mover advantage is huge.
Yeah.
They've already done what many are still dreaming of, landing on the moon. That gives them instant credibility, brand recognition, a head start in the lunar race.
They planted their flag on the moon literally and figuratively.
Exactly. And those high-value contracts with NASA, they're a stamp of approval from a leading space agency. They demonstrate trust and a shared vision.
So track record credibility, a powerful partner. What else is working in their favor?
Their cost-efficient approach is a major advantage. They've managed to achieve lunar missions at a fraction of the cost of traditional government-led programs. They leverage commercial technologies and prioritize in-house innovation.
So they're disrupting the space industry with a leaner, more agile approach.
Exactly. And remember, those 4 distinct business units. That diversification is another strength. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Right, spreading the risk, opening up multiple revenue streams.
And of course, we can't forget their experienced leadership team. Their aerospace expertise is essential for navigating this complex landscape.
Okay, so we've covered their strengths. But no company is perfect.
Yeah.
What about their weaknesses? What are the chinks in their lunar armor?
Well, as we touched on earlier, their lack of consistent profitability is a concern. They're growing rapidly, but they're still burning through cash.
Right, and burning cash isn't sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. And their balance sheet, while not disastrous, is something to watch. That negative debt-to-equity ratio, while largely technical, does indicate they're relying on debt to fuel their growth.
So they're walking a bit of a financial tightrope.
Yeah, you could say that. Another weakness is their limited operating history. They've only been around for a little over a decade, which isn't a lot of time. Compared to the giants, their track record is relatively short.
Like they're still proving themselves.
Right, and their dependence on government contracts, while a strength in some ways, also exposes them to vulnerability.
A shift in priorities or funding cuts could really hurt.
Exactly. So they need to diversify their revenue and reduce their reliance on a single customer, even if that customer is NASA.
Okay, so they need to broaden their horizons. Now, let's talk opportunities. What's out there for intuitive machines?
Well, that booming space tech market we discussed earlier is a huge opportunity. They're well positioned to ride that wave.
Like surfing a tidal wave of innovation and investment.
Exactly. And within that market, there's a growing fascination with the moon. Governments and private companies are realizing its strategic importance as a resource hub, a scientific outpost, and a potential gateway for deeper space exploration.
So they're not just building a lunar business, they're building it at the perfect time.
It seems that way. And remember that Lunar Data Network, that's not just about internet access. It's about laying the foundation for a whole lunar economy.
It's mind-boggling to think about the possibilities.
It is. As the cost of space travel decreases and technology advances, we're going to see a surge in demand from private companies wanting to do research test technologies and even extract resources on the moon.
So intuitive machines could become the go-to provider for all things lunar.
That's the goal. And they're not limiting themselves to just NASA. They're exploring collaborations with space agencies worldwide.
So they're thinking big, aiming for the stars, or in this case, the moon. But what about threats? What could derail their lunar aspirations?
Well, competition is fierce. We've already discussed the big players like SpaceX and Boeing, but there are also nimble startups emerging who could disrupt the market.
It's a constant battle for survival.
It is. And remember that reliance on government contracts, that's a double-edged sword. Changes in government policy budget cuts could really impact their plans.
So they're operating in a very politically charged landscape.
Right. And then there's the inherent risks of space travel itself. Missions can fail, launches can be delayed, accidents can happen.
It's a high-stakes game with little room for error.
Exactly. And finally, there's the financial risk. To achieve their goals, they'll likely need to raise more capital, which could lead to shareholder dilution.
And if investor sentiment changes or the market takes a downturn, that could make fundraising a lot more difficult.
Exactly. So there are definitely challenges ahead.
That's the million-dollar question, right? Lunar gold mine or potential crater? What do you think?
Well, there's no easy answer, unfortunately. It really depends. Intuitive machines has incredible potential, but there are definitely risks, especially in a sector as volatile as space tech.
So what are the key things investors should consider?
Financial performance is crucial. Can they turn that impressive revenue growth into consistent profitability? Positive cash flow, that's what's going to build long-term sustainability and investor confidence.
Yeah, got to show they can operate in the black duck.
Exactly. And then there's the execution of their upcoming missions, IM-2, IM-3. Those are major milestones. Any delays or setbacks could really hurt their credibility and impact the stock price.
It's like they're constantly under a microscope.
Yeah.
Not just from scientists, but from investors, too.
Absolutely. And finally, can they diversify beyond government contracts? Can they build those commercial partnerships and tap into that growing demand from the private sector?
Right. Prove they're not just a government contractor, but a real commercial space enterprise.
Exactly. Building a lunar economy, not just relying on NASA. Now, remember earlier I mentioned a big threat to intuitive machines.
I do. You definitely piqued my curiosity. What is it?
I think it's the potential for regulatory hurdles. Space is getting crowded, right? And the legal framework around commercial space activities is still evolving. Governments are trying to figure out ownership, resource extraction, environmental protection on celestial bodies. It's a lot.
So navigating those uncharted legal waters could be a major challenge.
Absolutely. Unclear regulations could stifle innovation, increase costs, create uncertainty for investors. It's the Wild West up there, and the rules are still being written.
That adds a whole new layer of complexity.
It does. It highlights that it's not just about technology, it's also about legal and political strategy for any company going into space.
Fascinating. So we've explored intuitive machines pretty thoroughly. We've looked at their business model, their financials, their leadership, their strengths and weaknesses, their opportunities and threats.
And now it's time for our listeners to draw their own conclusion.
Exactly. We've provided links to all the research and articles we used for this deep dive down in the episode description. We encourage you to check them out. Do your own research and form your own informed opinion.
Always do your own research. And for those who want to dive even deeper, be sure to check out the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel. And just a quick disclaimer, All investments carry risk, and past performance is not indicative of future results. Do your own research, talk to a financial advisor, and never invest more than you can afford to lose.
Great advice. So what do you think, listeners? Is Intuitive Machines a company you'd invest in? Share your thoughts, your predictions, your stock suggestions down in the comments. We love hearing from you.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of lunar exploration and finance, be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more fascinating explorations of the companies and trends shaping our future.
Until next time, keep looking up and maybe we'll see you on the moon.